strategies about how to manage that in unequal teaching and learning contexts. So please ask questions of our panelists as we work through. You can unmute and hop on into the conversation, or you can just throw them in the chat, which I will monitor. And then we'll see how the conversation goes. And if there's time, we'll split into breakout rooms to continue the discussion. But if not, we'll hopefully have a great, rich conversation with the larger group. So just one question. It has been requested that we record these webinars. Is everyone comfortable with that today? And if not, we are happy not to record. Specifically, the panelists too, I want to make sure that whatever stories you're sharing, you are comfortable with. So feel free to message me privately, or you can just give a thumbs up on the screen. So with that said, I would like to introduce our panelists, or I'll have them introduce themselves. So I will kind of call you to keep it streamlined, but if you could tell us your name, your professional role, and any social identities you are comfortable sharing or discussing. So Michele, if you're okay, well, I'll ask you to start us off with that.
Sure, thank you. Thank you also for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here today and participate in this discussion. My name is Dr. Michele Dow. I am an instructor at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, and I identify as a transgender female, and my pronouns are she and they.
Thank you. Amrita.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amrita Chaturvedi. I'm a faculty member at the School of Education at St. Louis University. In terms of my social identities, I would say I'm a lesbian, ethnicity, East Asian, specifically Indian. The other identity, and this is something that is very recent for me, and I still need to figure out what exactly I would call it. It's like I'm an immigrant, which this is like just a new thing for me. Like I never really thought of myself as an immigrant, but just came up, and so that is something that is evolving, but it was very interesting to see, wow, that is another identity I hold. So
thank you. And last but not least, Elizabeth.
That's so interesting that you said that, Amrita. Processing through identity all of the time. But my name's Elizabeth Thao. I am a teacher on special assignment on the district evaluation and ASD assessment team in Roseville, Minnesota, which is a suburb right outside of St. Paul. And before that, I was a special education teacher. And then before that, I was a TA in a Fed 4 setting for 5 years for students with moderate to severe disabilities. Identity-wise, I identify racially as Asian, ethnically or culturally as Hmong American. We're a small Southeast Asian-based ethnic group that hails from around the Southeast Asian area, Southern China, Thailand, and Laos. And then I'm also a special education teacher. I'm really exploring what that means for my identity, and I'm really conscious of how my race and my culture comes into that part of my identity as well.
Great, thank you. So the first question to start us off today is, what intersections of your identity have proven relevant in your educational experiences? And what are some of the strengths and benefits of those intersections have come up for you? So if it's okay, we'll just go in the same order. So Michele, we'll start with you again.
Yeah, sure. This is good. So actually the book that I just wrote that came out in March is all about using an intersectional lens. So I'm happy to talk about how that works for me personally. As some of the other panelists mentioned, you know, I am a white female. I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a very liberal part of the country, surrounded by, you know, very famous universities. So all of those things, I think, contribute to some degree of privilege that I have. And You know, as a transgender person, I'm sure there are parts of the country and definitely parts of the world where I might not have as much privilege or as much acceptance just about who I am. But I think that, you know, my experience with my identities could be very, very different from trans women of color. I mean, the research shows this over and again that trans women of color are subjected to much more violence, verbal abuse, you know, all kinds of things that really make life much harder. And that's not to say that I don't experience challenges. I do, and I think those have really helped in terms of one of the big initiatives at UMass Boston, you know, in light of all of the things that have happened this past year around, you know, killing of George Floyd and many other people of color, is that, you know, the university is really trying to focus and become a national leader in anti-racism. And of course, while I can never know the, you know, the Black experience or the experience of other people of color, there definitely are some overlaps between my experience as a trans woman and the experiences that people feel and face who are subjected to racism on a daily basis. And, you know, one of the things that I hear my friends who are people of color describe is just this constant awareness and actually exhaustion about, you know, living day to day with always having kind of one eye over your shoulder. And I think I do that sort of subconsciously. I'm not even aware, but, you know, I noticed that, I mean, I'm always sort of, if I'm, you know, before COVID, if I was on the subway or something like that, you know, I always knew who was around me because things can happen rather quickly, and you never know who's going to be friendly, who's not. And I think a lot of people who are in marginalized groups have that sense of awareness um, for themselves, for their families, and they talk to their families about these issues. Whereas, you know, many white people, cisgender white people, take these privileges for granted. So I think that really having that commonality with other marginalized groups has been really a plus and an asset for me.
Great, thank you.
I just want to say one thing to what you said, Michelle, before I jump to my answer to this question. It's funny you said the awareness of, when you said in terms of, I'm trying to think of the right word. The best thing I can come up with right now is like, in terms of my brownness. That was something that I didn't even think about myself up until 4 years ago, when, I don't want to get into politics, but this is kind of relevant, when Trump was elected. Like before that, I never even thought about my ethnicity or my skin color. And it was just all of a sudden, over like a period of 1 week, I was like, I started to be aware of my surroundings and looking over my shoulder. So I totally understand what you, like now I can say I understand what you mean when you say that. But before 4 years, that was not something that I was even aware, like for some reason I was not aware of it, which is a very weird thing. But anyways, coming back to my own identities and how they intersect and benefit me, I think the two identities I want to talk about is my sexual orientation and then my gender. So it's almost a blessing for me now, and I should say that in last probably like 5-6 years, that it has been a blessing that I have accepted my lesbianism, for lack of better words. It's like, it has become a benefit for me in the sense that I definitely feel I've had an easier time once I accepted that about myself and was totally comfortable with it, to navigate this male-dominated world of academia. Like it has really, like, that has really been a benefit for me in terms of my relationship with my supervisors, who most of the times are male, and how that kind of plays out. So that's very that's been a very interesting process for me to kind of look over and think through. The other thing is, I feel like if I had, because of my sexual identity or sexual orientation, I think I also have not had to struggle with some of the gender stereotypes that some other friends of mine, and probably some of you in here who identify as a straight female, kind of have to struggle with sometimes. So that definitely has been a benefit of one of my identities that kind of, helps me out. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but.
For me, in identifying as an Asian teacher and a Hmong teacher, here in the Twin Cities, there's a pretty prevalent Hmong population. So one of the greatest benefits for me is a linguistic benefit. I'm bilingual. I grew up learning Hmong and English at the same time. So just from a logistic point of view, things like setting up for interpreters, making a phone call, shooting an email, passing a message along to a family inside of a school is something I wouldn't necessarily need to go and find somebody else to help me communicate with them. I can just do it. It's something I was born with. It's something I've been doing my whole life, and accompanying my grandparents to their medical appointments and things like that. Even as a young girl, being their interpreter for these like important appointments. But because this was something that I culturally grew up with as something that was normal, this is just something that comes naturally to me. And now what I'm actually recognizing is that it's a strength. It's something that I can bring to the table that I find that my white colleagues don't have. And they always express to, gosh, I wish, if I could go back, if I knew more than one language, just how beneficial that would be. And then tying in with that, understanding like the linguistic benefits. So when I work with interpreters, I understand that I'm not speaking just to the interpreter, I'm actually talking to the person, and the interpreter is just playing that role of interpreting. And understanding like the patience that you need to be able to truly convey all of the messages from interpreting from one language to another. Again, it's something I grew up with. And, I will hear colleagues say like, oh gosh, this meeting is going to take so long because we have to work with an interpreter. But I mean, that's something that we need to accommodate, right? Like when we talk about like having this like lens of whiteness kind of permeate everything, like this idea that everybody knows and understands English in the same way is one of those things that that needs to be accommodated for us to really reach that goal of equity, right? So I really think that from a linguistic standpoint, that's definitely a benefit. I enjoy being a cultural liaison. I like to educate others on Hmong culture, what it means to be Hmong, especially for me. I would never say that I was the end all be all person to know everything about Hmong culture. That's definitely not me, but I can speak to it from my own personal experience. And in living in a Hmong community and having my Hmong family, accessible to me here, I do feel very strongly rooted in my culture, enough so that I'm willing to speak on it. And then also coming with the cultural benefit is just my ability to relationship build. Hmong people are really taught always to respect professionals in careers, but also to respect elders. So when I have to speak to a family, I'm never speaking from a place of hierarchy where I know more than you, I'm more educated than you. It's like going back and talking to my uncle about my cousin, like it's that's how I feel, and that's I think is a natural approach of having grown up as a Hmong person and having that be a part of my identity. And then furthermore, in relating with my students, because there is such a strong Hmong population here, it helps me to build the relationships with my students. When I say, hey, like, what do you think your parents would say, if they knew this was happening here at school? Like, there's this degree of, validity there. And there's like this like fear, like, oh man, she's really going to call my parents and then I'll be in trouble, But also I have this great anecdote about I was doing some co-teaching with one of the speech language pathologists, and she had a couple of Hmong kids in her group. And there was one student who really kept like switching between English and Hmong, but the speech pathologist, as a white woman, did not understand that that's what was happening. But when I was there to observe and help support in the group, I let her know that what this student was saying was indeed Hmong and that it was accurate. So, just having that extra skill set to be able to impact students and know that there might be a linguistic difference there, but that level of like the cognition is still there, the connection that they made, and that it was an accurate, reflection of a skill that they had is really important to me.
Great, thank you. The next question is, what are some of the obstacles you've had to overcome on your personal journey and professional experience? How did you address them? And what are strategies that either helped you deal with those particular instances, or maybe that you've developed because of what happened? Michele?
Oh, yeah. Well, first, I just wanted to comment on something that Amrita said about, under the Trump administration, and certainly trans people we feel like we've had a laser focus on our back for 4 years, to the point that, we felt that I can't speak for all trans people, but for myself and my friends, we had a feeling that our very existence was on the ballot, that people could vote whether they thought we were valid people or not. I mean, what other groups have that kind of experience? So I just wanted to pick up on that thread, because when Amrita talked about that, it really resonated with me. And, not that everything has solidified yet or changed, but when this past Saturday, I just posted on my Facebook page 3 words, which are "I can exhale," because I feel like it's the first time in 4 years I could stop holding my breath, and I don't even think I was aware to the degree that I was doing that. But to get back to the question you've asked, I think a lot of what's helped me has been really within myself, rather than trying necessarily to change others. Several years ago, when I first started to transition, I was a teacher. I was a reading teacher in a elementary school, and one of the things that I tried to do was, because elementary age kids have, in a lot of cases, they're well-meaning, but they don't have a lot of filters. So that whatever kind of thoughts come into their head, they will ask you directly, why are you dressed like that? Why are you wearing that? Oh, I noticed you have nail polish, whatever it might be. So in the beginning, I really tried to educate everybody about who I am and why I transition and so forth. And it just got to be so exhausting. And it also, I didn't have a lot of time left in the class to teach reading. So it was just, counterproductive. But it was something that I had to figure out for myself, to figure out that balance, and to figure out how to be respectful of others, how to notice when people, were asking legitimately sincere questions versus when they were asking maybe disrespectful or rude questions. So I think a lot of my strategies have been around just my own development as a woman, and just really being able to, strike that balance between self-care, self-respect, and also trying to be, helpful and honest where I can be. But I think having personal boundaries has been super important in that regard, so that, I no longer feel that I need to educate everybody on who I am and tell everybody my most personal secrets right up front, and, let them all know where I'm coming from. I don't feel like I owe people that. You know, I'm here today because I want to share this because I feel like who I am is beneficial to understanding all kinds of people with marginalized identities, including people with disabilities, especially. So I'm happy to talk about it today. But so I think those are some of the strategies that that I've used. So I'll pass it over to Amrita.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I think when I think of my struggles in terms of my identities, I think the biggest one was my internalized oppression, which I didn't even realize I had up until, I don't know, maybe 6-7 years ago. And that was specifically in terms of my sexual orientation. So that was one of my biggest struggles. It was like an unseen struggle. You know, I know like there was something and my mental health was not good, but I just couldn't figure out why. And it was because, you know, I had that internalized oppression and I didn't love myself. So I think for me, when I finally accepted that yes, I have internalized a lot of things when it comes to my sexual orientation, I think that was kind of the beginning of the change for me in terms of coming out of that struggle. It was almost like a weight was lifted. So that's kind of, yeah, the struggle side of things. In terms of strategies, I don't know if I would call this a strategy for myself, but I think for me, the biggest way to kind of, I can't think of the right word, but the best way to kind of live and be at peace with one of my identities, which I'm talking about is the sexual orientation, is to kind of change the perspective I have around it. And instead of looking at it as something that is not normal or typical, I look at it as something and what strength it gives me and brings to me, right? So just changing that worldview and perspective around my orientation has been the strategy, for lack of better words, that I've used. And it has really helped me in the last 5-6 years professionally and also personally. And it has also helped me be a better educator. Just by accepting myself and overcoming that internalized oppression has just made me a more confident and more open educator. So.
Thank you. And Elizabeth. Oh, you're muted.
I'm sorry, Liz, can you ask the question again?
Absolutely. I know these are all like 4 questions embedded in one.
Right.
So what are some of the obstacles that you've had to overcome on your personal and professional journey? How did you address those issues? And what are some strategies that helped you deal with them, or maybe that you developed because of what had happened?
So for myself, I have an interest in deepening my knowledge on ways to work towards racial equity. So I've had training in the Courageous Conversations protocols through the Pacific Educational Group. I did a lot of my undergrad work in Asian American studies, where I learned about racism through the lens of being an Asian person. And then and really it was like it blew my mind when I started thinking about how systemic racism really permeates everyday life. And subsequently, what I've been trying to do then is like join the racial equity teams at different sites that I've been working at. But even there, it's such a challenge because typically I am the only person of color on this team and it's all white people there. So I don't necessarily feel like it's an environment where I can speak my truth and really feel like my perspective is honored or held to the same kind of esteem that than that of my colleagues. So that's definitely a challenge. And in really just, I really think a big hurdle is just still acknowledging systemic racism and white supremacy and how that affects my everyday life as a person of color, but also all people of color. So again, in light of the situations now, again, George Floyd, that's like right in Minneapolis. Philando Castile, I literally went to high school with him, okay? Like these issues hit very closely to home for me, like the protests are happening right outside my door. So to see this happen, to know that even though Minnesota is a fairly progressive state, I feel, but we are still surrounded, and the majority of the population here are people who identify racially as white, that there is a lot of challenge in knowing how to navigate that. And thank you, Michelle, for making the comment about, striking that balance between, self-care and self-respect. Like, that really resonates with me, because again, like, these protests are happening, COVID's happening. I'm kind of caught like in the middle of it. I want to do something. So there is a lot of just like question and uncertainty still. And the feelings that are associated with that are challenging ones. What I do, strategies that I've found that work well for myself include finding white allies. Like, there is someone in my building who is going to, respect me professionally. And I try really hard to, special ed is a team-based effort. Naturally, that's what it is. And I find that on that team, the people who are working closest with me, despite the fact that they might be white colleagues, they appreciate me. They see what I'm here to do. So those are the allies I really try to lean in on. And then outside of that too, it's really important to continue finding those affinity groups. So I reach out, I do my own research to make sure that I'm taking professional development and seeking these affinity groups of educators of color that are specifically working together so that we can support one another as educators of color, because we know the teacher burnout rate is really high, and that is especially high when you compound it with teachers of color. So I try to find the white allies for when I'm working closely in the building. For my own self, I lean in on other educators of color. And educators of color are so wonderful, because it's like, once I'm in a space with all educators of color, I don't have to, make the case for systemic racism existing anymore. I'm in an environment where it's just like everybody knows, everyone's on the same page, and now we can really move forward into like a proactive step, instead of this challenging debate as to whether or not, white privilege is real and, white supremacy is real. So yes, I think having other educators of color to call on has been really key to helping me continue to navigate.
Thank you. At this point, we do have another question, but before we got to that, I just wanted to do kind of a checkpoint with everybody here and see if anyone had any questions or comments for any of the panelists at this stage.
I have a quick comment.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to turn on my camera. Okay. So I was really resonating with what Elizabeth was saying in terms of like being surrounded by individuals of color and just being able to resonate a bit closer with them, or feeling that form of appreciation on a different level. I went to school primarily in a white neighborhood where I was, the minority. But before that, I came from a school where it was predominantly Black, Hispanic, and, it wasn't weird for me to walk around the classes and, see people like myself. So I felt like I kind of just blended more. But when I had that transition to a new school, it was kind of like, oh, okay, this is a little different. And I just found myself feeling like I had to work harder in order to receive the help that I needed. And it kind of like, it brought me to a bit of a culture shock in a way, where I thought, we all get the same equal opportunity to, help when we seek it. But I found myself in my new school having to do more in order to show that, like, hey, I'm struggling and I need help. Whereas I saw other students who, look differently than me, and receive that help like with no problem, So that was kind of difficult for me to transition. However, I took that experience and kind of used it as ammunition in order to, break those barriers and not be fearful or be put down that, or I felt like I was being discouraged from, seeking help. But I used that as ammunition to, be unafraid, to go out and feel like, hey, like if I need help, I'm going to look for it, whether it's from this teacher or someone else or, however. So I really felt like what you were saying, had a significance to my story. And I would encourage the students that I'll be teaching in the future to do just the same. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you for sharing. You're not alone.
I just wanted to jump in and pick up that thread because, I think for myself as a trans person, and I'm sure for other marginalized groups, what sometimes happens is that we, especially if we're in an environment where everybody else is, not us or in some way, that we're called on to be the experts. Like people will say, oh, I think there's a trans woman who lives in the other part of Massachusetts. Do you know her? And I'll be like, no, why would I know her? Like, or somebody came up to me, I live in an apartment building, somebody came up to me the other day and said, I went to a drag show on Cape Cod. It was really great. And Cape Cod's like 60 miles away. And I looked at her, I went, I knew what she was saying, which is, I'm trying to connect with you in some kind of awkward way, but we don't always want to be the experts in who we are. And I think sometimes educational institutions latch onto that. I mean, there are trans people who want to go around the country and talk and lecture and just about being trans. I mean, I feel like I have other parts to the work that I do and the research that I do. And I don't always want to just be the expert on being trans. So I think as much as possible, whatever marginalized group you are a part of or identify with, if others can just sort of not always expect us to be the experts on all things, whatever we are. So I just wanted to add that.
If I can quickly jump in, it's almost like the burden of being a representative, right? You don't have a choice. Like it's just an assumption that is made that you will be the representative of that group that you belong to, and that in addition to going through our own struggles personally, that burden is like a added piece that we don't necessarily always talk about, right? And so that's just something else to keep in mind. If you are working with people who are coming from minority group, like how are you approaching them in terms of asking for their perspective and how you're asking them to participate in the conversation, right? So like, because some of them may not even want to be a part of it, right? But a lot of times we just assume that they will be because we think they're representative for that group, so.
Yeah, I've seen that happen over and over again with people of color, where we'll be talking about anti-racism or something like that, and everybody's eyes will turn to that person of color like, well, you must be the expert. They're like, no, I'm not the expert here. And it's just a very unfair burden to put on somebody, whether it's, because your first language is in English, that you are expected to become a translator or whatever it might be. There's so many ways that we put unfair burdens on people in that regard.
There's a comment in the chat that's pretty powerful, just I think in reference to what you all are talking about. It's the invisible mental load, right? Where people can't see it, but it's very real and sometimes too big. Yeah. Elizabeth, did you have something you wanted to hop in? I saw you unmuted, so.
I was thinking about it, and I know earlier I had made comments on like, hey, I'm willing to be that cultural liaison, and I feel like that comes a lot with the educator part of my identity. I've only known, Hmong people, like they've permeated my life. It is a reality for me. But the first time I came across people who did not know who Hmong people were, and then on top of that viewed Hmong people as a really just like a lesser ethnic group. It was really unfortunate for me, because I've always been raised to have a lot of pride in my culture, and again, all of these strengths that just come with being somebody, identifying as someone from my culture, to being treated as almost like a second class citizen, as compared to say more dominant Asian cultures, right? Like Hmong people don't have a country that we are associated with. So whereas Chinese people are from China, Japanese people are from Japan, to get into the nitty gritty of who Hmong people are, where they're coming from, why they're relevant in the United States, because there's a really crazy history there too, involving the Vietnam War and the CIA and all of that. So I just bring it upon myself, and having pride in my identity, and like having that educator like soul at heart, that I'm like, here I am, this is what I'm gonna do, because that's a part of getting to that that level of equity is to educate others. But Michelle, Amrita, fatigue is real. Like it's like I do very much get tired of feeling like I'm putting in the effort and not feeling sometimes that same level from others. Michelle, your anecdotes, I just feel for you, because bless these people's hearts, they are trying, and it is awkward, but at the same time it's like, you know let's just put those things that you think are making us different like aside, and if it wasn't for that one differing feature, like how might you treat me as just a human being with like mutual respect, right? So I I do want to put out there that even though I serve as a cultural liaison just naturally, that fatigue is real and definitely should be acknowledged.
So
Yeah.
another, I'm sorry, Michelle, go ahead.
Oh no, I agree with Elizabeth, and I also, another strategy that's been effective for me is having leadership wherever I work. I mean, at the university where I work, the department chair couldn't be more supportive, and I think making those connections with whoever your leader is, in whatever department or educational institution, and like putting it out there and saying, this is what I'm experiencing, and strategizing it so that you are managing it as much as possible. You're getting out in front of it. You're not just letting the train come rolling over you and just kind of, trying to figure out how to deal with it all on your own. Because as both of the other panelists have mentioned, that we do have so many allies. And even if people I always say to people, I mean, you don't have to know everything about what it's like to be trans, but if you can love me and respect me, that's really enough. That's really all I expect. I'm not expecting everybody to kind of get inside my head and live my life. But and I think sometimes it's necessary for whoever the leaders are to kind of make those kind of statements of support. I think they really go a long way towards helping that love and respect for marginalized groups. I mean, it really does start with the leader.
Elizabeth, did you have something to add on?
I was,
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Something I find really interesting about Zoom is that like in a panel, we wouldn't be able to really like mute ourselves, right? But at the same time, if there are things happening in the background, that's what we want to do. So I'm kind of alternating between muting and not muting.
It's not a call. It's not a hand raise of I I'm going to go next. Got it. Another comment in the chat that I just wanted to point out is that this can be quite fueled by trauma for many people, and we may be asking people to relive this trauma when we're asking them to step forward in that. And then, you know, focusing on that leadership, which actually that's a really nice transition to our next question, if that's okay with everyone. What issues of diversity and inclusion in special education and in education in general need immediate attention? And what is one key solution that you think would make the difference? So Michele, I'll throw that back to you.
Yeah, I think that just what I just talked about is something that I would kind of reiterate here about just whatever the marginalized group is, that to kind of put it out there that we are all, you know, whatever kind of a statement you can make of solidarity and respect for authenticity, respect for people's identities and struggles, allowing people to tell their story if they want to tell their story, allowing them to be quiet if they want to be quiet. I think all of those kinds of things are really, really important. And the other, you know, the other kind of sort of catchphrase that is not my invention, but Jennifer Boylan, who's a trans woman and New York Times columnist, you know, one of the things that she says is, if you've met one trans person, you've met one trans person. So that, you know, while the three of us on the panel can talk about our stories, you could find three, you know, completely different stories from someone else. So it's just that sense of, yes, you may hear about us and what our struggles are, but other people who may have the same social identity could have very different struggles. So I think the best thing is just allow people to talk and ask questions respectfully and let people answer when they want to answer, and they will tell you what they're comfortable sharing at that point. Just one other very quick anecdote is, you know, when I first started to transition, some of the teachers who were very, very well-meaning, you know, they invited me to this girls' night out, and I think I was very caught up in sort of some of the stereotypes of being female at that point, and you know, it was just too early for me. So sometimes, you know, be sort of like thoughtful about the kinds of things. If you're trying to sort of connect with people and reach out to people who are different from you, really listen and think about where they are in their journey and what might be best for them at that point. So that's all I got.
Great, thank you. Amrita?
Yes, so in terms of the issues that I personally feel that need to be addressed in the field of special education is, and this is coming from my experience this semester teaching the class interdisability studies, where we kind of look at the intersectionalities of people and using disability as the foundation of that. I've realized that one of the things that we probably are doing but not even thinking about in the field of education is that, yes, it is about disability. And we need to focus on that, but that is not the only focus. Our kids who have a disability have other intersectional identities as well, right? And sometimes the impact of those intersectional or other identities are the reason why their disability has been exacerbated, or that is causing the issue in the visible identity that you see, if it's a visible disability. And I think that's a conversation that I don't see that much in the field of special education. And that is something that that is kind of the issue that I think needs to be really addressed. And how do we do that? I think we just keep having conversations till people really get it. I mean, it's just like now the world is kind of waking up. So I think this is the right time for the field of special education to kind of start talking about intersectionality and not just disability, right? So yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
that really resonates with me. I feel like it's a kind of two-pronged issue. I think at the district or administrative, that leadership level, that I think there needs to be intention to recruit, train, and retain teachers of color. It makes a difference when students see teachers in leadership positions that look like them. So just being in their presence and showing up for representation. Like case in point for me, when Joe Biden won the election, I was so moved that Kamala Harris is now the vice president of this country. As a Black woman and an Asian woman, like that is something that in my wildest dreams, I never thought that that was going to be a possibility or like a reality in my lifetime. And even though I am not a Black person and I am not a South Indian person, like just knowing that it's a person of color and she has an Asian background, that means something to me. I didn't know a lot about her at first, but now I want to know everything about her and how she got to this point. So if we can reframe that and think about our students and where they're showing up to get their education and who they're getting it from. I hope that just like on speaking on being an educator of color and thinking about all the strengths that I have, like in just my identity, can help to translate like, hey, if there are more teachers of color, what can they all bring to the table too, to make it so that education, like the impact on these students' education is just very real and reflective of really what the United States is about or is supposed to be about, right? um, but also, I completely agree about the intersectionality in terms of disability. I feel like that just in the Hmong community itself, the literal term, like word for like disability in Hmong translates in English to stupid. Like that's just what it is. And so when I hear Hmong families speak about their children in this way, like I'm able to like if and I'm doing the interpreting, I would never say to a white colleague, "Oh, they think their kid is dumb," you know? But because Hmong culture does not really have the terminology to truly like describe conditions under which students might receive special ed services or have disabilities, there is, I mean, as a Hmong educator, I know this nuance, so I'm able to reframe it in that way. But again, I'm just one educator, you know, like think about if all the special ed teachers were Hmong or bilingual or multicultural and how much of a deeper understanding we would have. And in that, harnessing that power to truly, you know, educate others on what special education actually is and what disability actually is. So I'm lucky enough to know that I have been able to have interactions where I can use my background to be able to influence special education in that way. But if there isn't a conscious effort to find teachers of color, train them and retain them, then where are you going to get the teachers that are able to, you know, give that cultural lens to disability? So yeah, that is what I would hope to see in terms of like trying to be more inclusive in the field of special education. Definitely more teachers of color.
Elizabeth, can I ask you a follow-up question?
Sure.
You had mentioned hiring is one thing, but retaining teachers of color or teachers who are underrepresented is another. Do you have ideas or a way to like speak to the retainment of it? Because it's one thing to open the door, it's another thing to build the culture that supports that door staying open, right?
Sure. For me, I think that being in a leadership position means that you have you have the responsibility to acknowledge your white lens and how that might affect you know, when this teacher of color is being formally observed by you, right? Like the way you envision things as a white educator as an educated white educator might look, sound, feel different to this teacher of color, and how they're trying to display their, demonstrate their skills to you. And then that added pressure, like, please, if anybody out there is in a position where they are formally evaluating teachers of color, like understanding that extra level of pressure and anxiety that teachers of color are already feeling, knowing that they're being scrutinized and judged and their whole livelihoods are depending on this process, and having to work through all of that and still show that person that you are competent and intelligent and capable of doing your job is just like, there are so many of those compounding factors that go into a formal observation. So I think it's really up to the people who are in those positions to make the the accommodations and have the understanding that this teacher of color might present differently than what my white lens is, typically looks for, but to acknowledge those things as strengths that teachers bring to the table rather than from a deficit based perspective.
Can I add to that just quickly?
Please, yes.
The other things too, for the retaining side of things, is just showing the appreciation and like giving them a place to be heard. And then when they say something, follow up on that.
Yeah.
Right. And that is something that at least I have personally not seen happen. Yes, people will come and ask, yeah, so what do you think should be done to kind of change these things? And people share their opinion, but then 5 years later, nothing has really changed. Right. So would you want to work in an organization like that? No. Right. So it's like, yeah, I mean, it's basic. I mean, retaining people is a very, and I don't want to make it sound very simplistic, but it is. People will stay if they feel heard and they feel like they belong and they have that they mean something. Right. And those are the things that people who are in minority groups don't feel that. And it is not rocket science to make them feel those way in that way. It's just you do the same thing that you're doing with other people who are in majority group. Right. So just, yeah.
Yeah, if I could add to that too, I know in one of the other strategies we used, I worked with English learner programs in Boston for many years, and the overlap between English language learners and students with disabilities is a huge, huge challenge. But eventually, when we were trying to hire teachers of color and teachers who spoke some of the more low incidence languages, that yes, we worked with the universities to create those pipeline programs. I think that was one critical way of doing it. But the other was working with community-based organizations to connect to the community. I mean, Boston has over 100 different languages spoken in the city. And one of the largest groups is Haitian speakers. Some speak French, some speak Haitian Creole. And I think having more respect for the fact that, Haitian Creole, I mean, people used to look down on Haitian Creole, like, oh, French, that's very, fancy. But I think the more we were able to connect with the community, and each community had an organization of people that, they were kind of the leaders of their own linguistic communities. And having those connections made a huge difference. It not only brought people made people more visible, but it just created those pathways for people that may have been, very highly educated professionals in their home country. And so we were able to tap into that knowledge base, and that was very effective.
Thank you. So there's just a few minutes left, so I want to open it up again to anyone here, or maybe if one of the panelists has kind of final thoughts, we can end with those. But does anybody have any questions or comments as we wind down today?
I appreciate for
everyone here. And I love how, Elizabeth, that you talk about, you know, schools, we need to recruit, train, and retain teachers of color. And I went to this webinar yesterday about cultural humility, and someone was asking about how there's, you know, we always talk about we need to get people of color into the field, right? Because special ed, it's heavily populated with white teachers. So how do we get them? How do we make them want to be in the field? And the speaker, she told, this is an amazing answer. She said, well, I think the one question that we have to ask ourselves is how do we go to the community, and how can we offer, and how can we explain to them, and like how can we open our doors so they can see, and you know, like not try to tell them like, hey, come, but how can we contribute first? Then you know, that door just opens so widely that they would want to come without, you know, us trying to be so hard trying to figure out how to do this. So yeah, thank you. That was amazing talk.
Yeah, removing barriers is important.
Yeah, exactly.
Michele, before we go, I wanted to see if you were comfortable if I put a link to your book in the chat for everyone in case they wanted to read more about the work that you've been doing.
Sure, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Do you have a preference? I have it up on my screen. Just, is Amazon okay?
Amazon's fine. The publisher is Roman and Littlefield, and
Okay.
they may be, sometimes they have some discount codes or other ways to make it a little bit more affordable, because academic books are ridiculously priced. So
Got it. I'll put it in the chat now, right from them.
great, thank you.
Yes. No. Great. Let's see. Ruth has another link that she shared as well, another resource, More Than Allies, and then I just put Michele's book out too. So it's just about 4 o'clock. I'm really appreciative of Michele and Amrita and Elizabeth and your willingness to come today and share your stories. And I'm very appreciative of all of the participants coming to listen, and for those of you who spoke up about your own experiences, thank you. We are hoping we are going to have these again, Jenny, in 2021. And so we are hoping as an organization that we can continue to have conversations like this, in hopes to keep moving that needle a little bit as much as we can here. So unless anybody has any final words, we'll end it here today with a very sincere thank you, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we'll